Korea has been found to rank near the bottom with regard to life satisfaction among member nations of the OECD based on data collected from 2019 to 2021. So what is behind this dismal finding? What can be done to address it? And what are the efforts elsewhere to ensure life satisfaction? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Koreans are less satisfied with their lives than are their global counterparts, and today we delve into this sad phenomenon. For more on this, I have Professor Shin Eun-kyong from Korea University here in the studio. Professor Shin, it's a pleasure to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Kwon Soa with us. Soa, welcome back.
Always a pleasure.
Right, Soa, let's start off with a few words then with regard to the OECD survey on life satisfaction and its findings with regard to South Korea.
Right, so Korean people's satisfaction of life was among the lowest out of the OECD nations. Statistics Korea recently published a report titled Quality of Life Indicators of 2022, which revealed that in terms of life satisfaction, South Korea was ranked 36th among 38 OECD countries. And that was based on data between 2019 and 2021. So on a scale of 1 to 10, South Korea scored 5.9, and that's way below the average, the OECD average at 6.7. Only Colombia and Turkey had lower scores than Korea at 5.8 and 4.7 respectively. When looking at the results from just 2021, the score has slightly gone up to 6.3 from 6.0 in 2020. But what's noticeable is that the satisfaction level was way lower among people in the low-income group at 5.5, and low income meaning people with less than 1 million won of earnings, or that's roughly $760 US. Now, in general, the nation's gross national income per capita has been improving, although household debt increased along with it. And South Korea is a much wealthier country than in the past, which is the reason for why Korea is part of the advanced OECD nations. But satisfaction of life does not seem to be at the level of advanced countries. And another sad factor that the report shows is that Korea's suicide rate that is increased significantly, slightly that is, but significantly it's among the highest suicide rates among the OECD, in fact, the highest still among OECD countries. In 2021, 26 people per 100,000 committed suicide. The proportion of senior citizens living alone also went up in 2022 to almost 21%.
Right, I see. First then, Professor Shin, simply speaking, what do you believe affects the quality of life and the overall sense of happiness?
Defining happiness is a complex task. For example, when we hear the question, what makes you happy, we can think of millions of different things. Happiness is a subjective indicator, and that positive emotional state varies across individuals and even across societies. So happiness is far more social product than we assume. Happiness is generally considered as a highly individual matter. However, many factors that influence our happiness are often more greatly determined by social conditions. A high quality of life is affected by varieties of social and economic factors. Access to the basic resources such as healthcare, education, and safe living conditions are important because they contribute to individuals' physical well-being. In addition, social support and sense of belonging play an important role in individuals' emotional well-being as well, as they foster meaningful connections and sense of community. That being said, there is an interesting pattern that I noticed from the report. As Soa reported, unfortunately, we are not that happy compared to the people living in other OECD countries. However, what is more surprising is coming from how Korean happiness is constructed. The uniqueness of Korean happiness lies in the greater discrepancy among different components of happiness and overall life quality. There are multiple subcategories to measure overall happiness: GDP per capita, social support, life expectancy, freedom to make life choices, etc. Larger portion of Korean happiness is associated with the GDP. The reports draw our attention to the challenges that Korea faces in promoting greater well-being. For example, balance of life is 89th amongst the 146 countries. And Korea also listed as among the top 10 countries, the majority think that people should take care of themselves. We see that there is little agreement on social support.
Right, I see. And secondly, Professor Shin, as Soa mentioned, Korea has the highest suicide rate among member nations of the OECD. And in recent years, there has been an alarming surge in suicide numbers among senior citizens, elderly that is, here in the country. How do you explain this very, very sad phenomenon?
Suicide rate has long been a major topic in sociology. People may find this somewhat counterintuitive because we tend to consider suicide as a private matter or individual problems. Yet, then why sociologists deeply care about the suicide rate? Because suicide rate is a social product. Especially according to Emma Durkheim, who is one of the most influential sociologists, argued that anomic suicide increases when there is a sudden social change. When social conditions, whether it's economic or technological, dramatically change, often we do not develop the needed culture to adapt to the change. Then people can be in an anomic situation where they do not know what are the right things to do and how to behave appropriately, given the fact that older generations tend to be less flexible in adoption of the culture, and they could be more vulnerable in a fast-changing society. Then we can go back to the question, why do we observe extremely high suicide rate among the elders? Two distinctive characteristics should be considered. First, the elders in Korean society is growing really fast. And also, they're very weak in terms of their social connections. In 2025, we expect to have 20% of our population older than 65. It has been doubled last 10 years. And we expect this number to be close approximately 40% in 20 years. Yet, many of them are not well connected. As Korean society had become more urbanized and industrialized, the traditional social structure such as extended family has broken down really fast, leaving many older Koreans feeling disconnected and isolated. This sense of social isolation can be a major risk factor for depression and suicide. Also, economic insecurity also can be a serious issue for many elder Koreans, deprived from financial and also emotional support from the family. And many older Koreans struggle to find meaningful employment in a rapidly changing economy. On top of that, the mental health issues are often stigmatized in Korean society. And many people feel ashamed or embarrassed to seek help for depression or other mental health concerns. This can make it difficult for the people to get the kind of help they need, and this may also contribute to the feelings of hopelessness and despair.
Right, unfortunately. Meanwhile, so with regard to findings about the quality of life, I hear there was a tangible difference between the subjective evaluation and the objective evaluation. Could you explain that for us?
Right. There are different studies that make these assessments in a different way. So let's first take a look at one that's based on objective evaluation on life quality. The Human Development Index of the United Nations Development Program, which provides a measure of a country's 3 key dimensions of human development, namely a long and healthy life, access to knowledge, and a decent standard of living. So this one ranked South Korea 19th among 188 countries. And then when it comes to one that's based on the subjective indicators, the World Happiness Report Index of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network ranked Korea 59th out of 147 countries. And then the OECD, as I mentioned earlier, ranked Korea 36th among 38, and the OECD is based on a combination of objective and subjective indicators. So according to the OECD Better Life Index, among 11 areas, Korea came in second in civic engagement, that would be social participation, 7th in housing, and 11th in education. So pretty positive performances there. But Korea ranked 37th in health, 38th in community, which would be the quality of support network, and 38th in environment. So we can conclude from these results that abundance of life has been growing in the past years in Korea, while subjective quality of life has been going down.
Right, I see. And Professor Shin, it has also reportedly been found that higher income does not necessarily correlate with greater levels of happiness. Do you suppose happiness then is a matter of perhaps perspective?
My answer should be yes, with a little bit of no, because obviously basic need in our life has to be satisfied. Yet the economic security is a necessary but not sufficient condition. Meaning that there are other significant factors that contribute to our sense of well-being. It is true that many countries with generally lower income has report a higher level of happiness. Partly this is because the definition of happiness inevitably vary from society to society, and the relationship between income and happiness is not as straightforward as we may think, and that cultural and societal factors can be critical, if not more important. So income and happiness are not strongly correlated. One explanation for this paradox is role of social comparison, where people's happiness is influenced by their relative income or position in society rather than just their absolute values.
Right, I see. And so I believe there are studies actually that prove happiness is a matter of perspective, right?
Right. So let me introduce one of those studies conducted by the Pew Research Center, which is a U.S. think tank. It was titled "What Makes Life Meaningful?" and the study focused on 17 advanced countries, including South Korea, and some 19,000 adults have participated in it. So it tried to look at what people value in life, what gives them satisfaction, and also how much of these factors that satisfy people in their lives is fundamental across different cultures, as well as unique to particular societies. The predominant answer shared among most countries was they value family the most. 14 out of 17 countries cited family as what gives them the biggest portion of meaning to their lives. Occupation and career and material well-being were named as the second and third sources of value in life, followed by friends and community and health. Only 3 countries did not prioritize their families, including Spain, Korea, and Taiwan. For Korea, they ranked family as the third category. Now, Spain ranked health as the top priority, and Taiwan ranked society as the top priority. So what do you suppose Koreans' top answer was?
I think I just saw it on that list. Was that material well-being?
Exactly, it was. So material well-being, and then that was followed by health and family here in Korea. And according to the study, a big amount of publics stressed how important it is to have one's basic financial necessities satisfied, or even to enjoy some level of luxury in order to live a fulfilling life. Material well-being was mentioned by respondents in 9 countries, but only in South Korea it appeared as the primary source of meaning. The Netherlands, Belgium, Japan, and Spain ranked material well-being as second. Now, I mentioned that work was valued by a lot of countries. In fact, for 9 countries, it was the second most frequently answered source of meaning. But interestingly, only 6% of Koreans said their jobs or work gives them value to life. What's also mentionable is that this survey was based on an open-ended question. So it also highlighted that in some publics, tended to give fewer topics to what makes their life meaningful. And that tendency was especially seen in countries like Korea and Japan. So many in these countries have just named one answer for what makes them happy, and most of them said material well-being.
Right, I see. Now, based on what Soa has said, then, Professor Shin, do you suppose money would make Korea more happy? I mean, what, in simple terms, can be done to ensure more happiness for people here?
Oh, this is not an easy question, obviously, but the quick answer could be found from those who are unhappy. So one of the research that I'm conducting with the doctors at the psychiatry department at Korea University Hospital, I have the data on 55 patients with depression. And I found a dominant reason for their depression. Any guess?
Really?
38 out of 55 patients answered their social relations.
So like you said, disconnection with society then?
Yes. And also it's not about the disconnection itself, but it's more about having stressful relationships. So the relationship source could be a mother's daughter's boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, and a mother-in-law, and husband, and so on and so forth. So maintaining good relationship is a difficult task in any society, but in Korea, the difficulty is compounded by the strength of social ties and tightly binding nature of social relationship. In fact, the intensity of social relationship in Korea is relatively strong. So some countries like life satisfaction had found in the social relationships, but while Korean people answered about the material security, and this may not be because we don't care about it, but we do not have the satisfactory relationship experience in Korea. And we know that relationships matter in our life, but maintaining good relationship is not easy. But as you ask what we can do to be happier, then I would say, if you want to be happy in 10 years from now, or even 10 days from now, I think we should invest in people and relationships.
I see, invest in people and relationships. And before I do that, so I'm going to ask you, what can you share with us about efforts by governments elsewhere to ensure public contentment?
Well, let's start with New Zealand, which is one of the happiest countries in the world, which has a well-being budget that has been introduced in 2019. It's based on the idea that material wealth alone is not a sufficient measure of life quality. Now, although New Zealand has been a country performing well in happiness-related studies compared to other countries, it has been facing long-term challenges like domestic violence, child poverty, and housing that the well-being budget is trying to tackle. And more investment thus has been put into the health system, education, and safety, but less priority on growth of GDP, for instance. And in the UK now, there is a Ministry of Loneliness that's been existing since 2018. It's founded on the notion that emotions like loneliness, depression, anger, and so forth need to be handled by the community and the country. And the country also has to be responsible for loneliness and the consequences that come from loneliness by individuals, such as suicide. The ministry cites studies that suggest loneliness is as harmful to one's health, life expectancy, and mental well-being, just as harmful as obesity or smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The ministry compares loneliness in the 21st century to an epidemic, and that it has a deep effect on people from all kinds of age groups and from all walks of life. Speaking of epidemic, in 2021, the loneliness minister in particular warned that the issue of loneliness has become critical to tackle due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So what's being done? The government intervenes in the problem of loneliness by establishing standards for measuring and classifying loneliness, strengthening social networks, etc. And projects include simply, for instance, planning gatherings of people in a community. Now, Japan, meanwhile, has followed suit in 2021 with the appointment of its first loneliness minister to reduce widespread loneliness, social isolation, and rising suicide rates, which also appear to have been going up amid the pandemic. So what seems to be the common idea of these efforts is that more money and attention needs to be placed for the well-being and happiness of the members of society, even if it means taking away some partial spendings for other things. And this may also be the reason for why it could be a more challenging task for Korea to fight issues related to the well-being of individuals at the government level. Now, Korea is, however, also continuously trying to get suicide numbers down through its suicide prevention law. And also, opposition lawmakers back in 2020 launched a policy research group in a bid to make happiness a key strategy of the nation's policies.
Right, and talking about the nation's policies, Professor Shin, what needs to take priority in tailoring a happiness policy that's suitable for South Korea, do you think?
The report actually shows the fast-changing dynamics in the Korean value system. And among OECD countries, we're not happy. We talked about this. And also, it's disappointing the status is low. But what's really helpful for us to notice is the discrepancy among these components we talked about. And so Korea made a remarkable economic progress. But still, it faces significant social and economic disparities, and that can undermine people's overall well-being and happiness. Addressing issues such as poverty, inequality, and discrimination can create a more just and equitable society, which can enhance people's sense of belonging and social support. And another important efforts, as Soa mentioned, the strengthening social relationship and community belonging. The Korea has a strong sense of collectivism and social cohesion, which can be a source of great social support and well-being. However, rapid social change such as urbanization, industrialization can erode social ties and community belongings. Promoting social capital such as trust, reciprocity, and civic engagement can foster a sense of community and social connectedness, which can positively contribute to people's happiness.
Right, and beyond borders, but staying in Asia, so I understand Taiwan has been found to be the happiest country here in Asia, according to a related UN report. What appears to be driving Taiwan's public contentment?
Right. Taiwan is the happiest nation in Asia, excluding the Middle East, according to the UN World Happiness Report released in March last year. So the happiness index for Taiwan was 6.512, placing it 26th out of 146 countries. That was significantly higher than South Korea at 59th, Japan at 54th, and China at 72nd. And Taiwan's performance last year was not unprecedented because since 2018, it has maintained that trend for the past 4 years. But it's not always been the case. In 2013, actually, Korea and Taiwan both scored 6.2. However, from then on, Korea's happiness dropped and Taiwan's went up. So what contributed to that, according to reports, it's a political shift in 2016 and also policy changes in the minimum wage and other work-related policies, as well as a growing trust in the government and economic growth despite the COVID-19 pandemic. So these have been named as the factors despite Taiwan having geopolitical difficulties such as threats from China.
Right, I see. And finally, Professor Shin, speaking as a scholar of sociology, how would you define happiness? A brief response.
Just not as a sociologist, but as a person, I'm happy when I feel like I'm a decent human being. I know, of course, I don't think there is any quick recipe to achieve that, but we are all in process of learning how to become a better person and to be satisfied with ourselves. But only one thing I know for sure as a sociologist, I cannot do this alone. We cannot be happy in isolation. So I think we should really care about the social connections and belongings as together.
Right, those are some very important words right there. All right, Professor Shin, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you for having me again.
And Soa, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you.
Right, well, on that note, we say goodbye. We return same time on Thursday with a look at the latest on the pandemic front as Korea ushers in its new academic year. Thank you for now.